After a bitter fight with my in-laws at Christmas dinner, my son and his wife stopped speaking to me. Weeks later, on my 68th birthday, I sat alone in the kitchen beside an untouched cake and a table set for three. No one came. The house was quiet in the way only an old, empty house in Nashville, Tennessee can be in the dead of January. The silence was heavy, the kind that settles in corners and stays there, making every small sound seem like an intrusion. Then the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting to hear his voice, but the tone that came through the receiver was cold and flat, rehearsed like a man reciting a script he had been forced to memorize on the drive home. Bo Katu Luchant, my son said. You have two choices, Dad. You apologize to my wife's family, or you can spend the rest of your life alone. 2 weeks later, I bought a one-way ticket and vanished. My son's face turned pale when he finally realized what I had done before leaving. But before I get to the night, my son gave me that ultimatum. I need you to understand something. The moment a man realizes he has become invisible in his own family, it doesn't come with thunder. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives the way winter does in Tennessee, slowly, then all at once. By the time you feel the cold in your bones, it's already been there for months. My name is Arthur Vance. I am 68 years old. I built a construction company from $400 and a second-hand Chevy truck. I raised a son I would have died for. I loved a woman for 37 years who was without question the best decision I ever made. After she passed, after Helen left me alone in a house full of her handwriting on recipe cards, and the smell of her perfume still caught in the curtains I held onto, the one thing I had left was my son, Peter. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. This is not the story of a bitter old man. I am not bitter. Bitterness is what happens when you swallow your pain and let it rot. What I felt on the night Peter called me on my 68th birthday was something much cleaner. It was clarity. Pete, I said, sitting in my kitchen. The birthday cake I had bought that morning from the local bakery was on the counter, still in the box, still uncut. I had cooked pot roast, Helen's recipe, the one Peter used to ask for every year growing up, and I had set the table for three. I had been waiting since noon. It was past 8 in the evening when he called. You owe Eleanor and George an apology, he said. He was talking about Eleanor and George Stanford, his wife Clara's parents, and he was blaming me for how I acted at Christmas. Clara and I have talked about it, and honestly, Dad, we feel like you've been difficult, like you don't even try to fit in with her family. I looked at the birthday cake. I thought about the pot roast going cold on the stove. I thought about the 3 chairs I had pulled out from the table that morning, the way I always did when Helen was alive and the 3 of us would sit down together. 3 chairs, 1 man. So here's the thing, Dad, Peter continued, and I could hear Clara's voice somewhere in the background. Not her words, just the shape of them, the quiet coaching underneath. You apologize to everyone sincerely, not the way you usually do it, where your mouth says the words but your face says something else. Or honestly, maybe it's time you figure out how to be on your own. The kitchen was very quiet after that. I want you to hold on to that moment. The birthday cake, the empty chairs, my son's voice on the phone telling me that my choices were to kneel or to disappear. I want you to hold on to it because that moment is the center of everything I am about to tell you. I hear you, Peter, I said. I appreciate the clarity. Then I hung up. What Peter did not know was that by the time he made that phone call, I had already been preparing for exactly this conversation for longer than he could imagine. Not because I am the kind of man who plans for betrayal, but because I am the kind of man who pays attention. And I had been paying very close attention for a long time. Within 2 weeks of that phone call, I had done things that would make Peter's face go the color of old ash when he finally found out. I had booked a one-way ticket. I had made certain that every door he thought was open to him was in fact locked legally, permanently, and with the kind of precision that only comes from planning something with a clear head and a steady hand. And then I had disappeared. Not dramatically, not in anger. I packed a bag the way I always pack. Efficient, neat, nothing wasted. I drove to the airport on a Tuesday morning in February. I did not look in my rearview mirror when I pulled out of my driveway for the last time. Not because I was trying to be cinematic about it, but because everything I needed to say goodbye to, I had already said goodbye to the night before. The look on Peter's face when he finally understood what I had done before leaving, when he came back and found doors closed that he had never once thought to check while they were open. That is the story I am here to tell you. But you cannot understand the ending without understanding the beginning. And the beginning starts 40 years ago with $400, a second-hand truck, and a name I was determined to make mean something in this city. I started Vance & Son Construction in 1987 with $400, a second-hand Chevy truck that had 200,000 miles on it, and a heater that only worked if you hit the dashboard in exactly the right spot, and a name I had borrowed from a future I hadn't built yet. The son part, I put that in before Peter was even born. Helen thought that was the funniest thing she had ever heard. "Arthur Vance," she said, laughing so hard she had to put down her coffee mug on the kitchen counter. "You haven't even got the son yet, and you're already putting him to work." "I'm thinking ahead," I told her. She shook her head, still grinning, and reached over and fixed the collar of my worker shirt the way she always did, straightening things that didn't strictly need straightening, just because her hands needed something to do when she was happy. "You are the most stubborn, most forward-thinking, most impossible man I have ever met," she said. "I mean that as a compliment." "I know you do," I said. "That was 1987. I was 30 years old. We were living in a rented house on the east side of Nashville, the kind of neighborhood where everybody knew everybody's business and nobody locked their doors. And Helen was 4 months pregnant with Peter. I had been working for another contractor, Walter Higgins, for 6 years, long enough to know exactly how a construction company should be run, and long enough to know I wanted my name on the truck. The first job Vance & Son ever did was a bathroom renovation in Germantown. 3 days of work, $280 after materials. I came home that Friday evening with the check in my shirt pocket, and Helen was at the stove making chicken and rice. And I pulled the check out and held it up without saying a word. She turned around, looked at it, looked at me, and her eyes went bright and full, all at once the way they did when something mattered to her deeply. She pressed her lips together tight, trying not to cry. And then she absolutely failed at that and cried anyway, laughing at herself while she did it, wiping her face with the dish towel. "Arthur," she managed. "Vance & Son," I said. She walked over and put both arms around me, dish towel still in hand, and held on. I held on right back. We stood in that kitchen for a long time. Peter was born 4 months later on a Thursday in October at Vanderbilt Medical Center. I held him in the delivery room, and my hands, these big rough contractor's hands that had laid tile and poured concrete and swung hammers in July heat, were shaking so badly the nurse asked if I was all right. "Fine," I said. My voice came out strange, thick. "I'm absolutely fine." I was not fine. I was undone completely in the best possible way. He was so small, that's the thing they don't prepare you for. How small a baby actually is. How it seems impossible that something that small could be the thing that rearranges your entire understanding of what matters. I looked at his face, and I thought with a certainty I have never felt before or since about anything. I would burn the whole world down for you. The years that followed were the kind that don't make for dramatic storytelling, but make for a good life. I worked 6 days a week for the first decade, early mornings, late evenings, every Saturday, and most Sunday afternoons. Vance & Son grew from bathroom renovations to full residential builds to commercial contracts. We hired our first employee in 1991. By 2005, we had 12 people on payroll and were managing commercial properties across Nashville. I missed things. I won't pretend I didn't. Peter's third-grade school play. I was on a job site in Brentwood. His first Little League game, I made it to the last 2 innings and caught the look on his face when he spotted me in the stands, the way his whole body straightened up with pride, and that look cost me more than any contract I ever signed. "Dad," he said after the game, running over with his cap pushed sideways. "Did you see my hit?" I did. I lied. I had not. But I had seen his face when he saw me. That was enough. He grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the concession stand, talking a mile a minute. I let him pull me, my hand wrapped around his small one. I thought about the company, about the name on the truck, about the future I was building one contract at a time for him. When Peter was 17, I sold our first residential property, the house I had bought and renovated on Eastland Avenue, to pay for his college tuition deposit. Helen had the paperwork ready before I even asked. You didn't have to do that, she said one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the signed documents between us. Yes, I did, I said. She looked at me the way she sometimes did, like she was reading something written very small in my face. You know he loves you, she said. You know that. Arthur, he doesn't need a company or a house or a college fund to know you love him. He just needs you to show up. I show up, I said. I know you do. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. I just want to make sure you know that the rest of it, the company, the properties, all of it. It's good, Arthur. It's good work, but it's not the whole of you. Don't let it be. I squeezed her hand. As long as I've got you telling me that, I'll be all right. She smiled the slow, sure smile that she saved for moments when she knew something I was still learning. Well, she said, I intend to be around for a good while yet. She was wrong about that one, but I did not know it then. And on that evening in that kitchen with her hand over mine, I was by every measure that mattered a happy man. That happiness, it turned out, had an expiration date I couldn't see coming. Helen Vance passed on a Tuesday in October at 12 minutes past 3 in the afternoon with her hand in mine. She had been sick for 14 months, not the kind of sick that arrives with drama, no sudden collapse. The kind that settles in slowly, the way a house shifts on its foundation. You don't notice until a door won't close right anymore. I was with her every day. I would get to the hospital by 7 in the morning, bring her the crossword puzzle from the newspaper because she hated the ones in the magazines, sit in the chair beside her bed, and drink the terrible coffee from the vending machine down the hall. We would talk. Helen had opinions about everything. Arthur, she said one morning, about 3 weeks before the end, when her voice had gone thin, but her eyes were still sharp and entirely herself. Come, sit closer. I need to tell you something, and I don't want to have to raise my voice. I pulled my chair right up to the bed, took her hand. Pete, she said. You're going to worry about him, Arthur. Let me finish. You're going to worry about him. And you're going to pour everything you have left into making sure he's all right. I know you. You'll put him first the way you always have. She paused, drew a careful breath. But Arthur, you have to promise me something. Take care of Pete, but don't disappear into it. Don't make yourself so small that there's nothing left of you by the time you need yourself. Promise me you'll take care of him, but promise me you'll take care of you too. I pressed her hand to my lips. My voice came out rough and broken. I promise, I said. She studied my face, then smiled. Good, she said. Now go get me a crossword. This one's too easy. I kept the first half of that promise. The second half, that one I struggled with. After Helen passed, I drove home alone on a Tuesday in October, and I sat in my driveway for 22 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The house felt different. The house was full of her, and she was nowhere in it. Peter came. He and Clara drove down that same evening, and I was grateful. Peter hugged me in the front hallway. Dad, he said, pulling back, his eyes red. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, son, I said. Clara stood a few feet behind him, a composed, careful woman who expressed sympathy the way some people sign documents correctly and at a distance. Arthur, she said, if there's anything we can do. They stayed 3 days, then went home, and the house got quiet in a way that had no bottom to it. That first year, Peter called on Sundays, every Sunday, regular as weather. The second year, the Sunday calls became every other Sunday, then once a month. I told myself he was busy building his career and his life with Clara. I understood. It was around that time that I properly met my neighbor, Ruth Miller. Ruth had lived next door for 11 years, but we had exchanged little more than waves over the fence. Her husband, William, had passed 2 years before Helen. She was 65, sharp-tongued in the kindest possible way, and she had a habit of appearing at my door on weekend mornings with 2 cups of coffee already made, as if she had simply decided we were going to be friends and was giving me no say in the matter. The first time she did it, I opened the door and she held out the mug. You look like you haven't talked to another human being in 4 days. Only 3, I said. Close enough. She nodded toward the porch chairs. Sit. I'm not going anywhere for at least an hour. I took the coffee and sat, and for the first time since Helen died, I talked to someone who was not my son, not a client, not a contractor, someone who just wanted to know how I was doing and had no agenda attached to the asking. One morning, Ruth looked at me sideways over her mug. Arthur, are you lonely? I turned the question over. Loneliness is a choice, Ruth. I said finally. So is everything else. She raised an eyebrow. That's either very wise or very stubborn. With you, I genuinely cannot tell which. Probably both, I said. She laughed, a real chest laugh, and the sound of it hit me somewhere I hadn't expected. The particular ache of realizing that laughter had been absent from my mornings for longer than I had noticed. By the fall of 2024, Peter and Clara's visits had become rare enough that I had stopped expecting them. Dinner twice a year if the calendar cooperated. I had adjusted to this the way you adjust to a bad knee. You stop waiting for it to feel normal, and you just account for it in every step you take. I was not angry, not yet. But something had started shifting quietly, in the way that important things always do. I had almost convinced myself that Christmas at the Stanfords' house would be fine, that I could walk into that house on Westminster Boulevard and smile and make talk and be the kind of man people are glad to have in the room. Peter called me on December 21st to confirm I was coming. "Mom and Dad are looking forward to seeing you," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "Clara's been cooking all week. It's going to be a good time, Dad. Really." "I'll be there," I said. I wore the navy jacket Peter had given me the previous Christmas. It was a good jacket, wool blend, well made. I had worn it exactly twice since he gave it to me. I wanted him to see me in it. Eleanor and George Stanford lived in Bellevue, which is the kind of Nashville neighborhood that has its own zip code and its own unspoken rules about which cars belong in which driveways. The houses sit back from the street behind old trees, and the whole area has the stillness of a place where money has been sitting long enough to get comfortable. I had built 2 commercial properties in Bellevue in the 90s. I knew the streets. I arrived at 6:45 p.m. Dinner was at 7 p.m. I parked on the street because the driveway already had 4 cars in it. I walked up the front path, my breath fogging in the cold air, and I was just reaching for the doorbell when I heard voices on the other side of the door. The door was not fully closed, just a half-inch gap where it had settled wrong in the frame, the kind of thing a contractor notices immediately. Through that gap I could hear clearly. Eleanor's voice first, warm, polished, carrying that southern inflection that makes pointed things sound like pleasantries. "I just hope he doesn't make it into a whole thing again the way he did at Thanksgiving," she said. Then George, lower, agreeable. "He means well, Eleanor." A short exhale, the sound of someone setting down a glass. "Peter married well, despite his background," Eleanor said. "But that father of his, Arthur, I worry he's going to become a weight around Peter's ankle. He has no idea how to read a room, and he gets so defensive about that little construction business. Clara doesn't say anything because she is gracious, but I can see it on her face. It's embarrassing, George, for Peter especially. I just think at some point Peter is going to have to make a choice. He doesn't need that weight around his ankle." I stood on the porch in the navy jacket my son had given me, and I listened to my daughter-in-law's mother call me a weight around my son's ankle. My hand was still raised toward the doorbell. I lowered it slowly. I was not shaking. What I felt was something much colder and much more clarifying. I felt certain. I straightened my jacket, reached out, and pressed the doorbell. The door opened. 30 seconds later, Eleanor Stanford stood in the entrance, in a burgundy dress. Her silver hair swept back, a smile arranged on her face with precision. "Arthur, you made it. Come in. Come in." George appeared from the living room, extending his hand. "Arthur, good to see you." Peter came around the corner a moment later, looking comfortable and at home. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Dad, you look good." He glanced at the jacket. "Is that hay? You wore it." "Of course I wore it," I said. "It's a good jacket, son." He smiled, a real smile, the kind he had as a kid. For just a moment, standing in the foyer, I let myself feel something like hope. Then Clara appeared, elegant and composed. Dinner was served at 7 p.m. sharp. The dining room was long and formal, dark wood table set for 9, crystal glasses catching the candlelight. I took my seat near the end of the table across from George and unfolded my linen napkin. The first thing came about 20 minutes into dinner. "Arthur," Eleanor said, reaching for the bread. "Peter tells us Vance & Son is still going strong. The smaller residential projects, there's such a steady market for that, isn't there? People always need things fixed." I set my fork down briefly. "We moved into commercial property management about 15 years ago, actually," I said, keeping my voice easy. 43 properties currently, 12 people on payroll. Oh, of course, Eleanor said, waving a gracious hand as if the distinction were charming rather than important. George, didn't your college roommate do something in development? George launched into a story. I glanced at Peter. He was cutting his chicken. He had heard every word. He did not look up. I noted that, filed it away. The second thing came about 10 minutes later when the conversation turned to retirement. There's something so freeing about it, Eleanor said, stepping back. At a certain point in life, you've done your part. The next generation needs room to grow without the older generation hovering. She smiled at me. Don't you think, Arthur? I find I'm not much of a hoverer, I said pleasantly. Never had the patience for it. George chuckled. I looked at Peter again. He was reaching for his wineglass. His eyes tracked across the table, anywhere but my direction. My chest pulled tight. He was choosing methodically and deliberately not to see me. The third thing, Eleanor said, arrived with dessert. It takes a certain kind of self-awareness, she said, to recognize when holding on becomes a burden to the people you love most. Don't you think, Arthur? The table waited. I felt Clara's stillness, and I felt the weight of Peter's silence like a physical thing. I looked at Eleanor Stanford. I think the people who love you most, I said, are usually the last ones to call you a burden. A brief beat. George cleared his throat, and the moment dissolved. I looked at my son one final time. Peter's jaw was tight. He had heard every word of every exchange, and he had sat there and said absolutely nothing. That was the answer I had come for. After dessert, I stayed for 40 minutes, then thanked Eleanor and left. I got home at 10:40 p.m., hung up the jacket, fed my cat Jasper, and sat at the kitchen table. On the wall, Helen's calendar was still hanging. My birthday, January 19th, was circled in red. I looked at it for a long time. Then I got up, went to the phone, and called Reverend Matthew Cole. Matthew and I went back 40 years. He was the pastor of a small Baptist church in East Nashville now. He answered on the second ring. Arthur, it's late. What's going on? I need to get some things in order, Matt, I said. Legal things. I need a good attorney, someone thorough. Does this have to do with Peter? It has to do with everything, I said. Tonight, I finally got the answer I needed. I need a lawyer. Linda Mercer is the right person, Matthew said. I met Linda Mercer on the morning of January 7th. I brought my yellow legal pad with 8 numbered items. Linda looked at the list. The company restructuring, that was 2 years ago, she said, looking up over her glasses. That's already done. It is, I said. And Peter was never included in that restructuring. He was not. Linda leaned back. Tell me why, Arthur. Their wedding reception, I said. October 2022. I heard George Stanford talking to a friend. He said, Peter married into our circle well. That construction inheritance of his should set them up nicely. I realized then what they saw when they looked at me. They saw a bank account with an expiration date. So, I protected the company. I had restructured Vance & Son Construction into a discretionary trust structure with independent co-trustees, governed under Tennessee Code, Section 35-15501. The company and its commercial assets were fully shielded, and Peter had no legal entitlement or vested interest in them. Linda looked at the rest of the list. I worked with my real estate agent, Alan Stone, to sell the house off-market. Alan found a buyer within a week. Next, I had Linda amend my probate-avoiding revocable living trust under Tennessee Code Section 35-15-602. I directed that the entire proceeds of the house sale, along with all my personal liquid assets, be transferred into a charitable trust I had quietly established. The Sunrise Foundation, which supported elderly individuals who had no families to care for them. The transfer was structured to ensure that no portion of my estate would pass through intestate succession or old will provisions to Peter. The documents were drafted to render any prior inheritance claims void ab initio. The closing was set for January 20th, the day after my birthday. On January 19th, I woke up at 6:15 a.m. I made coffee and started cooking. Pot roast first, Helen's recipe. I made mashed potatoes, roasted carrots, and set the table for 3. I bought a cake from the bakery. I sat in the quiet kitchen and waited. At 8:05 p.m. the phone rang. It was Peter. He gave me the ultimatum. Apologize to Clara's family or spend the rest of your life alone. I hear you, Peter, I said. I appreciate the clarity, and I hung up. The next morning, the moving truck arrived. I packed only what fit into 2 suitcases. On the empty kitchen table, I placed a wooden memory box. Inside the box, I put Helen's wedding ring, the photograph of Peter and me laughing at Percy Lake when he was 9, and a USB drive. On that drive, I had recorded a video of me sitting in the dark kitchen on my birthday, blowing out 68 candles. Our boy didn't come, I said to the lens. On Tuesday morning, I boarded a flight to Maine. I had bought a one-way ticket, and I was not looking back. I woke up at 6:15 a.m. on January 19th, a year later, in my cottage in Maine. The Atlantic was pushing against the rocks below the cove. 69 years old today. I made coffee in the heavy ceramic mug Martha from the bakery had given me. I took the coffee to my writing desk. I had been looking at the letter for 6 weeks, not because I didn't know what it said, but because I had promised myself I would wait until Peter's birthday, January 19th, to send it. I wanted to give him 5 months with his own newborn son, Julian, before the letter arrived. I wanted him to have time to be a father before he had to think about what kind of son he'd been. The letter was short. Peter, you gave me 2 choices. I found a third. I hope one day you find yours. The ring stays with you. The photo stays with you. Everything I built with these 2 hands, the part that matters, is already inside you whether you claim it or not. Tell Julian about his grandmother. That's all I've got, son. The rest is yours to figure out. Dad. I put on my heavy green canvas coat, walked more to the post office along the water, and handed the envelope to Agnes. She weighed it, stamped it, and dropped it in the outgoing bin. I watched it disappear. 3 days later, Ruth Miller called me. She told me Peter had driven down to my old house. He stood at the driveway, looking at the Robinson family's car and the moving boxes. They let him in when he explained who he was. He went straight to the fireplace, Ruth said, looking for Helen's photo, but it was gone. Then he found the wooden box on the kitchen table. He sat down, opened the latch, and took out the Percy Lake photograph first. He pressed it against his chest, Arthur, and then he watched the video on his laptop. He fell apart completely. He held the ring in his closed fist and just cried. It was the real kind, the kind you can't stop. Did you talk to him? I asked. I did, Ruth said. I made him tea, and I told him everything. I told him about the birthdays he missed, about the dinner, about the choices he made. I thought he deserved the whole picture. You were right, I said. Thank you, Ruth. After I hung up, I stayed at the window, watching the dark Atlantic water. The water moved steadily, honestly, entirely itself. 11 months of watching it, and it had never once been anything other than exactly what it was. I looked down at my left hand, the gold band on my finger. Every single thing I had done in the past year had been a choice. The Christmas party, the midnight call to Matthew, the legal documents, the memory box, the one-way ticket, the letter now in the mail. Choices, all of them made with both hands, the way I had built everything in my life. I was simply here, and here it turned out, was enough. Matthew Cole once told me, God doesn't promise us that the people we love will choose wisely. He only promises that we don't have to carry their choices for them. I held on to that through every hard mile of this past year. I still hold on to now. If there is anything I want you to take from this story, it's this. Don't wait. Don't do what I did, spending 11 years setting a table for people who had quietly stopped intending to show up. Telling yourself they were busy, telling yourself next time would be different. The people who deserve a seat at your table will pull up their own chair. Value yourself before the world teaches you to, because the world's lesson is always more expensive than you expect. I am not a perfect man. I made mistakes I can't undo, and I made peace with a few I can. That, I think, is the most any of us can honestly manage. This has been my story. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. Take care of yourself.